Greetings adventurers, and welcome to Lookout Marketplace. As a player, it may be tempting to memorize the stat blocks of encounters that you think your dungeon master will throw at you in your games. But once the party starts thinking about those fearsome creatures as a couple of bite attacks and a breath weapon, metagaming can really cut into the suspense of these games. The dungeon master does ultimately decide on what the final stat block is of a creature, and if he thinks you're trying to break the encounter, he can always adapt it on the fly. So don't get too angry when the creature is suddenly immune to that type of spell you just accidentally picked as the perfect counter to them. Today's treasure is a three-parter by the name The Life and Times of Statblock Man, the first one being called The Rise of Statblock Man. Friends, gather round and I shall tell you the tale of Statblock Man. From whence he came, few now know, but the legend has it that he has memorized every stat block in every monster manual ever created. His actions are relatively tame compared to the tales of woe found here, but even so, he finds himself in this den of horrors and madness. But first, let us introduce those who stalwartly stood witness to these events. DM, me, myself, and I, your humble narrator. Fighter, a player who had more patience than they had right to, but was quite vocal of their dislike towards the subject of our story. Barbarian, a quiet fellow who suffered in silence. Artificer, a penchant for forgiveness and tolerance, though did speak out against Statblock Man. Sorcerer, the friend of Fighter and someone who actively dislikes Statblock Man. And of course, Statblock Man, the legend himself, a man of metagaming prowess few have seen, and someone eager to bask in the spotlight for all to witness their greatness. He also played an Azimir Warlock Cleric. We start in humble beginnings. Many moons ago, I first met Statblock Man while looking for a game in which I could play. At first, all was well. He was a little overeager, but his enthusiasm was infectious. The game that he ran is worthy of a tale in its own right, but after playing with him for a little while, a spot opened up in my game. I, bright-eyed and full of eagerness, invited Statblock Man to join my merry band of players. Splendid, thought I, surely all will go well and we will have a great tale for the ages. Alas, how right I was, but for all the wrong reasons. And so, with joy in my heart for not needing to plumb the depths of Reddit or Roll20 for a new player, Statblock Man joined our ranks. The first sliver of worry entered me when I read his backstory. It was adequate for my purposes, but full of a dark brooding cloud of edginess. It smacked of a tragic hero, but without the trappings of subtlety. In a word, it felt like anime. However, my optimism prevailed, for I had great confidence in Statblock Man at this point. A tad gauche, I murmured, but nothing that cannot be fixed or used for narrative drama, and so my fears were laid to rest for the time being. When the next session rolled out, the party was faced with a Revenant, a foul creature having been created from the body of a former enemy. I delighted in the party's reaction. They were surprised and generally did not know what the creature was capable of. Artificer, in particular, enjoyed the enemy, as it was he who had killed the Revenant when it had been human. He expressed his excitement at the unknown challenge. Then Statblock Man spoke. Do I know what this is? I asked him to roll a religion check. As fate had decreed my doom, he rolled an at 20. I divulged the Statblock Man knew only whispers and rumors of a thing called a Revenant, a creature of malice and revenge. However, having come from the humble origins of a farming town, he knew little else. What proceeded to tumble from his mouth was nothing short of quoting the stat block of the Revenant. He told the party of its regeneration, the fire would stop it, and they needed to kill it lest it paralyze them, and that it was rolling extra damage due to its ties to them. I paused, took a deep breath, and reminded the man of stats that a natural 20 does not give you perfect knowledge. Statblock Man quieted down and the fight continued. The Revenant was slain and the party rejoiced, though began to wonder what had brought such a foe upon us. Alas, this commotion happened in an inn, so their musings were cut short. The captain took the party aside and questioned them. The fighter and sorcerer explained the situation. The barbarian was able to speak when another voice rose above all else. Statblock Man spoke, again reiterating all the forbidden knowledge his character should not have possessed. This time, the barbarian spoke up. The Dungeon Master didn't tell you those things. Stop this. But he would not be stopped, no. For as he spoke over all others, including this humble narrator, he began to describe his entire backstory. This great tale of misery and woe, how he sought to do great things, but only could fail. How he felt he was destined for more, but could not find the path, how he knew only the deaths of those who walked in his wake and the suffering of his former allies. All this and more after having only known these people for a few days. He then, for reasons beyond the ken of mortal folk, revealed he was an Azamar by spreading his radiant wings in the tavern. None spoke. What could have been said in the face of such flagrant display of anime syndrome? The session ended shortly after I vowed to speak with Statblock Man in private to correct what I viewed as over-eagerness. Alas, dear reader, I was not prepared for what awaited me. And there is a perfect example of why metagaming takes a lot of fun out of the session. Statblock Man, because he felt like a nat 20 means that he basically gets to read right off the stat block, completely destroys all the suspense that a Revenant has. I think it's one of the coolest types of NPCs that you can have as a recurring villain, because obviously the fact that they're a Revenant means that you've already fought them once and there's probably some backstory there. So being able to have them as like one of those recurring bosses that you fight 1, 2, 3 times before you finally best them and kind of resolve that story arc is a really cool moment. But instead, no, you got someone like Statblock Man who comes in and he's like, use fire, do this so it doesn't respawn. He's going to do extra damage to you, so stand back a little bit so he doesn't have that swing. All right, everyone have fun? Cool. Give me my XP. But our humble narrator, as he puts it, promises to confront him in part 2, A DM's Folly. Welcome back, dear reader. Last we left this bard's tale, I told you of Statblock Man, a man who could recite entire stat blocks of any creature that crossed his path. This tale continues with how he combined his prowess for metagaming with the love of spotlight stealing. We also see how this wretched narrator failed to stop him, and then he goes into the same cast as before, a self-declared hero. After the debacle with Revenant and Statblock Man's inexplicable relaying of his tragic backstory, I took the man aside. My dear fellow, I said, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you need to consider others. Also, please keep in mind that you are not the Dungeon Master, to which Statblock Man agreed. He profusely apologized to any and all who would listen, and I sighed in the greatest relief. Good, the problem is resolved, or such was my thought at the time, if only it were true. The next few sessions saw peace. Statblock Man reined in his behavior, and the party continued merrily onward to whatever doom I had prepared for them. There were flashes of his need for the spotlight, glimmers, but nothing extravagant. However, one night, when an innkeeper asked for a story, Statblock Man could not resist. Out burst his tumultuous tale of terror and tragedy, how he had embraced to follow the god of death if only to find true purpose, how he had lost companions in the past and feared that he was the sole cause of their death, and how he might lead his current newfound friends to similarly gruesome, untimely ends. The fighter audibly groaned and spoke out of character. We get it. Can we move on? Statblock Man sputtered, but enough, I said, and moved the session forward. Soon enough, the party were heading onward yet again. However, we were beset by their old foe, the Revenant. The Statblock Man began to declare that he did not know anything about the creature and proceed to act accordingly, but not after a luxurious description of opening his wings to fly out of its reach. During the fight, the party came into a disagreement over a rule. I mulled over the problem and was beginning to declare my judgment when Statblock Man spoke. Well, I know what I would do, said he, most smugly. The sorcerer and fighter cried out in single voice, we know, but if only there was someone who made rulings when there was a disagreement, like the Dungeon Master you just spoke over. He was caught off guard. I sighed, declared my ruling, and moved on. The fight continued, but the dice declared a dismaying defeat should luck not be found. However, a hero was found in Statblock Man as he charged the fell Revenant and used Inflict Wounds. A wonderfully powerful spell indeed, one he had been bragging about for weeks, one that he was eager to try if merely given the chance. How it would be so powerful were he to roll an at 20. And as fate declared my doom yet again, he rolled a 20, most natural, and thus the crowing began. A few sessions later, Statblock Man continued to declare how he had saved everyone from the Revenant with a natural 20, ignoring his previous behavior had endangered some of the party, and that the fighter and barbarian had done much to whittle the Revenant. Yet what was most egregious was that he would take up our time by declaring mundane aspects of his greatness, the number of cantrips he had, how much potential he had, his grand, contributions to our noble cause. By this point, my companion's voiced concern in private. Artificer spoke up. The Statblock Man was beginning beginning to grate him. The fighter and sorcerer scented this, the fighter confiding that they were losing their enjoyment. The barbarian was more ambivalent. And here, dear reader, is where I faltered. I should have removed the man of stats then and there, but I was also a player in his game on another day. I should have simply saved myself the troubles to come, but I begged my friends for time, for I thought surely if I talk to him again, all will be well. And indeed, all was well for a session or two, yet by now the party was in trouble with a deadly dame of great wealth and influence. Though in private, Statblock Man still declared he was a great help to the party, how he never erred or did wrong. I was non-committal in my replies, though did mention dice are fickle, and thus my folly was revealed yet again in the events preceding. The party encountered a Daybuk, a demon that uses corpses as puppets. The party had embroiled themselves in a fight with the creature, a creature that I was certain none had seen, for I had scoured the tomes looking to stump Statblock Man. However, he saw through my cleverness and once more declared the creature's stats for all to hear. "Ah, we must kill this thing, for it will find a new host soon. It is a foul demon," he declared, asking for no knowledge check to my utter surprise. "Cease," we all declared. "Stop this maddening metagaming." He was silent. Afterward, the fighter unleashed their ire upon Statblock Man. Artificer nodded in agreement with the sorcerer. The barbarian even voiced his dissent, and I spoke yet again with the woeful man of stats. I expressed my extreme dislike for his recounting of stats. I decried his spotlight hogging and his perpetual penchant for purposely self-preening. I was losing patience, I said. He begged and pleaded for one final chance. I wavered in my resolve to remove him then and there, to never see his hide nor hair again. I thought my ire would contain him, so I concurred one final chance. Thus my folly was complete, for I once more allowed him to carry on. Fate would have me pay dearly for my blatant idiocy. And now we have a dungeon master who really dug deep in the monster manual to find a one-off monster that, you know, he's hoping Statblock Man would never face. But since Statblock Man is a dungeon master himself, apparently he's combed over these tomes even more than our narrator here. And again, like, totally minimizes the suspense. And when you think about it, this is like a multi-stage monster encounter that he's cut in half and says, all right, here's how you defeat it in the first phase so we don't have to deal with phase 2 or onward. And as a dungeon master himself, he should realize how frustrating that would be, where the narrator here, the person who wrote the story, put all this effort into finding an interesting character, and he was going to utilize all its abilities in combat, and Statblock Man's like, I don't want to deal with it. Here's how you beat it quickly. Let's see what happens in part 3, because clearly he hasn't learned his lesson yet. This one goes by the name of Clerics and Conclusions. And here he introduced the cast again. I will jump forward to the part called We Can't Go Back, where part 3 really begins. Ire still fresh, we began anew. Statblock Man was humbled, so I thought. The party was in somber spirits. No doubt, they thought this narrator, their trusted dungeon master, a fool of the highest folly. By this point, a Tempest cleric had joined our ranks and was warming themselves to the party as a whole. A noble spirit he was, and whilst quiet, he provided the party with a fresh face to engage in glorious role-playing with. Never to be outdone, Statblock Man once again regaled us with his troublesome, tragic telling of terribleness. We get it. Everyone around you dies. I feel like the party kinda wants to die too now. What arose next are what some may call shenanigans. While having nothing against such endeavors, it was at a time most critical. You see, the fighter had picked up a sword most foul, a cursed weapon that was draining away their very self. They had planned to leave the city via ship, but the ship's master was on a schedule. They did what all fear most, split the party. Statblock Man, Fighter, Artificer, and Cleric went to the restricted part of the city. Barbarian and Sorcerers stayed with the ship, begging for time. As I mentioned last, the party had fallen ill of a notably nefarious noble, yet for some reason, unbeknownst to any to this day, to pass into the restricted area while knowing that many guards were corrupt and in the pay of said noble, Statblock Man puffed out his chest and said, "Worry not, friends, for I know what to do." His solution was to impersonate the captain of the guard belonging to the same nefarious noble. It seemed as if fate was turning, for the dice decreed a dismal failure for that wretched man of stats. His reaction was to flee the guard. Up he flew, but like Icarus, he flew too high. Thok, thok, sang the crossbows as they shot him from the sky, and so Statblock Man fled to the docks. The guard gave a merry chase and took the fighter, Artificer, and Cleric into custody. The artificer used their quick wits to talk their way through despite all odds, and were instead escorted to the temple. As payment for releasing the deer fighter from their curse, the temple priest asked the party to cleanse a close-by island of foul undead, and so they did, but not without Statblock Man crowing how amazing his daring escape from the city guard was. By this point, naught could be said, for he would be ceaseless in discharging his words. Wrapped in falsehood and self-aggrandizement, he babbled, oblivious to all. The events of the island are of little relevance, except for Statblock Man's reoccurring metagaming and the ghost incident. You see, good reader, Statblock Man knew no caution. Dice, thought he, are mine to command. I shall be the savior the party needs, even if they do not want it. Our stalwart cleric ended up possessed by a ghost. To save him, the dreaded statistician spoke up. Rising like an unforeseen storm, inflict wounds, he said. Broken from my reverie, I queried, my good man of stats, are you sure? Yes, he said in a grim voice, there is no other way. The ghost must be expelled from our most virtuous cleric, since he did not turn these foul undead as he should. Pause here a moment to dwell and consider what Statblock Man said, to tell another what should have been done, and thus he rolled once more. Fate, it seems, is as fickle as dice, and she laughed once more. Natural 20, quoth the stat man, natural 20 and nothing more. Dear God. I will say that the narrator here is definitely as theatrical as Statblock Man himself. And honestly, there is nothing wrong with the narrator having a little flair for extravagance for himself, especially since he's writing a story after the fact. But I do wonder how much of it is the narrator and the Statblock Man kind of being at odds, trying to out GM each other because they are in each other's games. I would love to know what happened in Statblock Man's game where he runs it himself, just for a little more context. But the problem I really do have with Statblock Man is, regardless of how theatrical he is and over the top, clearly the other players feel like the spotlight is being taken from them and they get no moments. So clearly they're being a little excessive, even if the narrator here can be a little eccentric himself. So let's continue. I paused, all was silent. Here was true madness, I thought. Poor cleric. He did not die, but the table was inflamed, engulfed in their passions and raged against Statblock Man and I, for he crowed mightily as the damage he dealt to his own ally, and I had allowed this to continue, not without effort to abate it, but hope was fading. By now, the fighter by this point was drained of will to play, and the sorcerer likewise. And were this where our tale concluded, I would have left knowing all my failures were mine to bear, but 'tis not, by the gods there's more. Recall, fair audience, that the party had fallen afoul of a deceitful dame. A lady most wicked and powerful invited them to dinner after the events on the island. None assented, for they felt a snare encircling them. The ladies' guard insisted, their captain most vehemently, but no steel was drawn. No weapons clashed until Statblock Man, who believed himself above consequence, attacked, shedding blood. His hubris sent him down in the first round, for he could not metagame against this guard captain, for this fell fellow was of my own design. Still, Statblock Man considered himself justified in his actions, crowing that he would win though, despite the setback. The party was forced to shed blood and the city guard was called. Statblock Man was shocked when they were arrested. I mean, he did attack the guard captain. He grew grim, his crowing subsiding. The rest of the members could only offer him resentment. The fighter spoke out, look what you've wrought. You've screwed us. Statblock Man for once had no defense for what he had done, but no apology passed his lips, no word of sorrow was uttered. He maintained that he was right and there was nothing else to be done, but he spoke those dreadful words, it's what my character would have done. Oh no. The party was subsequently exiled from the city for many years, the artificer speaking most eloquently in the party's defense, but the damage was done. Valuable time and effort lost due to Statblock Man's hubris in ignoring consequence. Out of game, the friends were enraged. Too much too long, they cried. The dreaded statistician must be exiled, and I concurred. I pronounce his doom to them all, one by one, most fittingly to him last. His desire for their forefront had cost him dearly. He offered no defense. For all his verbosity, he offered no last effort and faded silently as a shade. Yeah, but what's the stat block on that shade, you know? What's his... Alright, I'll stop there. 'Tis done, I fought. Farewell, Statman. Farewell, monstrous metagamer. You who quoth, 'tis CR4. Farewell, I say. May you darken my game nevermore. Jeez, this guy. And now we have the epilogue. Resilient reader, this concludes my tale. Here inscribed in digital ink are the life and times of Statblock Man. I know not what became of him. He is out there somewhere, they say, haunting the pages of the web. He waits, I fear, to burden some other soul with his eldritch truths. But he is gone. The party has moved on to many new adventures. The game still lives. We're better for it, and look back at this sordid tale with laughter and light in our eyes. The tale is told, my work is done. Thankfully, this narrator has been spared the horrors most others have endured. I fear my prose has put off some, but to you who have endured, there is the tale of Statblock Man's campaign in which I partook. There is a retelling I could do, but humble reader, I leave that to you. I know he apologized for it, but you know, I really did enjoy how he wrote it, and especially since this isn't the common way that people write their RPG horror stories, it was very enjoyable. Now, you know, if there was 20 stories like this that I covered on the channel, I might have a different tune, but right now, it gave me a lot more laughs than it gave me trouble, even though I had to do a couple retakes with a lot of these lines. So I hope you guys appreciate that part at least. What can I really say with this story besides the fact that, yeah, it's not one of the worst offenders, but it does have a lot of the common tropes that we've seen in these horror stories. This is a story of a guy who, as a dungeon master, you know, has a lot of insights, and instead of helping this dungeon master make his game more enjoyable, he decides to cut him down. Like, if you're playing low-level characters and the first time you fight a troll, you don't really know how regeneration works, it's a really hard encounter, and then later on when you're a grizzled veteran and you face a lot of trolls of a similar CR rating, you wipe the floor with them, quickly stop their regeneration with fire spells, and move on. It makes your character feel like they've really grown, and that's an experience that Statblock Man will always rob a party of. And when it comes to his overall edginess, like, that's not exactly a bad thing. We've seen plenty of stories where the edgy guy, when he lightens up here and there, it's a great moment for the party, and it's just his character being a little brooding. But this is an in-your-face, very confrontational type of edgelord, which is a little bit worse and a little bit more likely to cause like party kills or parties being captured, like here. The real problem is the way he's made his backstory. You know, he's like a cleric of death with no purpose, and death surrounds him. And when you make a character that intentionally sees the rest of the party as expendable, yeah, there's gonna be a lot of issues that come from that over time. So I can see why they all eventually turned on him and kicked him out. Should he have been kicked out earlier? It is hard to say with a lot of these stories, and the narrator here kind of attributes it initially to him maybe being like over eager, but it is a good rule of thumb that once the whole party, you know, is kind of voicing these issues, you've talked to him several times, it's not getting better, you're kind of resenting the game themselves just because of Statblock Man, yeah, it's probably time to kick him. So that's totally fair. I would say that you should have probably done some homebrew variants where, you know, like maybe the Revenant wasn't weak to fire. And if he has like a meltdown that basically boils down to you're not following the stat block, you're a bad DM, yeah, cut the guy right there. Because yeah, that would be ridiculous to say that as a dungeon master, you have no agency and he's allowed to just kind of completely metagame and throw all party balance you're trying to set up out the window. I hope you guys enjoyed this story. It's a bit of a longer one. It's got a little bit different of a narrative tone, so please comment to say if you liked it or not. Thank you everyone who's become a member. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel as it really helps us grow, and I hope to see you in the next video. Farewell for now.